Hello YouTube. The Ural Mountains narrow mountain range that runs about 2,500 kilometers to western Russia. Starting from the Arctic Ocean's coast to northwestern Kazakhstan, the mountains are important for two main reasons. First, they form the popular boundary separating Eurasian landmass into two continents, Europe and Asia. Secondly, they're some of the world's oldest mountains, dating back 300 to 250 million years ago. There's a wide variety of paranormal phenomena in the Ural Mountains, and I have been describing it in my videos. You can find a lot of videos on the subject in my channel. The Ural folklore is very rich in all sorts of stories about encounters with mermaids. Many such stories come to us from ancient times. However, we will not delve into the Middle Ages, but consider only a few examples relating to the most recent, the 20th century. This information was collected by local Ural researchers, Volobuyev and others, and I've been collecting information for a number of years. Now, the case I'm about to tell you was told by Baradulina. She was born in 1880 from the village of Polnevo, Polevsky district. They lived near the water. There was a river right behind the garden before it was wider and deeper. Her father put traps in the morning. The girl spent the whole day mowing. In the evening she remembered about the traps and went to check them. The father comes to the water, pulls, but there is no trap. And what he saw is that a female comes out from under the water, and she was pretty. She beckons with her hand and calls out, "Get into the water, there are your traps, get deeper, deeper into the water." So the man undressed and went into the water. He kept going, he's already up to his neck, and the girl is beckoning him further and further. His head was already underwater. The girl laughed, shook her tail, and disappeared. Since then, the Baradulian's father no longer went to the water and did not put there his traps. Now, in here we can safely say Baradulian's father really lost his trap, or muzzle as they call it in the village, and clearly through no fault of his own, which he immediately told his daughter, and probably not to her alone. As for the girl, it is difficult to decide. We're speaking about the female he saw in the water. And Volobuyev wanted to believe that she certainly was a mermaid, but it is unlikely that she would speak in a human voice. And here is what was recorded from the words of Yefimova, who was born in 1899 in the small Ural town of Salda. Earlier in their pond, some witch lived with a long skiff or billhook and cast iron frying pan. This was known, her name was Opalicha. As soon as the beans start to ripen in the vegetable garden, there is no end to the kids coming to raid the garden. So they climb into that vegetable garden and steal. And Opalicha would get out from the pond and into the garden during the day to guard so that no one gets the hold of the beans. The kids were afraid, of course. As they climb into the garden, they hear a noise, they run, they don't look back. So she was guarding this vegetable garden, and at night it was also almost also impossible to swim in the pond. Opalicha was floating with her frying pan. The kids were afraid, and during the day there was no one bothering them, so they could swim, and they did. In this case, there is no reason to doubt the existence of a mermaid. However, it remains unclear whether she had a tail. Even if it wasn't there, it doesn't change the situation. Mermaids often appear before eyewitnesses not in the usual mythical image with a scaly fish tail, but with similar to humans' arms and legs, like a human. The main thing is that they live in the water. As for the beans, then the following assumption is appropriate. This Apolicha simply fed on them, and the cast iron frying pan served as her object of protection. Apparently she was afraid of people, and of those kids too. Frolov, who personally experienced indescribable horror at the sight of Apolicha, still lived in Nizhny Salda about 3 decades ago, and he recalled, they once sat together with a friend in their garden eating beans. Suddenly they see that there is something hairy with a stick, and it lunged at them. So since that time, Frolov had a heart defect, and his friend began to stutter and still stuttered. Many kids suffered from this at that time. A resident of Siserty, Makarova, who was born in 1893, distinguished herself by her brevity, retelling the story in the most concise form. They had mermaids living in the water. Some guy found a golden comb, so mermaids went to him at night and said, give them the comb, give them the comb. You see, someone took it from a mermaid. Well, the presence of mermaids probably can be refuted here. Apparently, that guy found an ordinary comb on the shore, which the girl accidentally dropped, or he stole this comb when she was bathing, and she saw the thief's face. Although there are noticeable inconsistencies there. Why did the girls go after him at night and did not go after him during the day? And in general, it is not clear where the peasants could get gold from in general. We'll have to leave Makarova's words on her conscience. And what the fate of the comb was, we will never know. Here's another excerpt from the narration of Medvedev, who was born in 1887 and who lived in the village of Medvedevo, in the Verkhny Saldinsky district. An old man told him that he was constantly seeing things. There used to be a lot of fish, so he went to the Tagil River for 3 versts, that's like miles. There's a mountain there called Vysoky Kamen. That's where he experienced it. It was as if the songs on the other side were humming like mermaids, someone was doing that. And the horses were running, and all this seemed like devilry to him. This scared the old man, and he decided not to fish there at night anymore. Okay, so until now it was only legends. However, in addition to legends, there are so-called fables related to the genre of folklore for non-fairy prose. They're also very popular in the Urals. Here's just one of many stories recorded 45 years ago. It took place in 1936. A resident of Nizhny Tagil, Azisova, at that time still a child, together with her father, traveled to the Ural Ridge, the area of the geographical border between Europe and Asia. From the village of Yelizavetinskaya to the Smorodinka stream, about 300 meters from them was an abandoned graphite mine. On the site of a long-standing mine, a narrow lake was formed, the shores of which have been already overgrown with bushes and trees. It was there that the father was going to show his daughter what is popularly called mermaids. They were lucky enough to see some humanoid creatures with arms and legs like humans, but without fishtails and scales, as described in the myths. Father and daughter watched them for a long time. This strange creature appeared out of the water and climbed on a tree, from which they jumped into the water every now and then. At the same time, melodious singing without words could be heard from their side. Alexandra Stepanovna carried the memory of singing mermaids through her whole life. She still does not mind going to the same place to revive the impressions of childhood. The fact that the old mined-out mines and abandoned mines of the Urals are really mysterious, we are convinced once again by the example of Bajov's fairy tales. It is not for nothing that he wrote so much about the mistress of the Copper Mountain. Something I urge curious people worldwide to read to understand the essence of the Urals and many of its mysteries. Now, mermaids made themselves felt after the World War II, and even nowadays there are reports. On August 25th, 1974, at 1 o'clock in the morning, a resident in the village, Alexander Katayev, a young boy but already a seasoned hunter by then, was walking along the bank of the Chusovaya River. Suddenly he heard someone splashing in the water. He thought it was a big fish, but when he heard a strange muttering, he crept closer to the shore and lay down in the bushes. A few meters away from him, he saw a man and a woman who did not look like people. Both seemed gray in color, only the female had red curls all over her head, and she was clearly pregnant. The man, so to say, took out a box of twisted birch bark from the bushes and began to treat his girlfriend with something laid in it. Perhaps they were eating berries. At the same time, they waved their arms merrily, jerked their legs. The female screeched with an unnatural metallic voice. Having fun, they knocked rock on rock. Apparently, they tried to strike a fire, but only sparks flew out. Sometimes they talked among themselves. The vocal sounds were fragmentary, like k, nu. In the end, they got tired of sitting in one place. They went into the water and swam silently to the opposite shore. Although only the heads of strangers were sticking out of the water, Katayev still managed to follow them, thanks to the moonlight. After crossing the river, they began to shake each other off with their hands and then quickly climbed up the steep monolithic rock. Once at the top, they immediately disappeared into the darkness. Alexander Katayev told his incredible story, which can hardly be attributed to the folklore genre, to the participant of the seminar on the relic Humanoids, whose last name was Trachtenherz, and who came to visit him from Moscow. Based on the method of cross-examination in a confrontation, Trachtenherz concluded that Alexander Katayev was telling the truth. A comparison of this information with the testimony of other eyewitnesses collected by the Ural enthusiasts over the decades has relieved many natural coincidences, which practically eliminates the possibility of imagining this. In addition, after the adventure, Alexander became ill and was admitted to the hospital. What he observed greatly shocked him. He experienced a real shock and became ill based on the being nervous after what he had seen. So let's sum up the long-awaited result. There's no doubt that mermaids really exist and live in the Urals. The Ural land has kept a lot of mysteries since ancient times, and one of these mysteries is the real existence of supposedly mythical mermaids. And Ural researchers also hoped that the 20th century was not fatal for the mermaids and that some of them are still around. But before we embark to the Caspian Sea, let's look at fascinating reports from the Volga region. The Russian kikimaras, werewolves, mermaids, gnomes, devils, goblin, domovoi, all these are creatures from fairy tales and legends, which however have left a noticeable mark in the folklore of the Russian and other peoples of the earth, as if people encountered them in reality, and often in dark, dense forests and dead swamps that surrounded rare settlements in the olden days. Such rare settlements still exist in the vastness of Russia, its north, and especially in Siberia. I remember reading a statement of one Russian who knew about the phenomenon. I do not have his name now. Mermaids, water goblins, kikimaras, etc. They also live with humans. His grandfather told him the following. Returning home from a party, because the grandfather was young then, far after midnight, he passed by a garden. There was a huge pond in the garden. The night was clear, and then he noticed the girls out of the corner of his eye. They laughed and beckoned the man. The grandfather reiterated he saw all this out of the corner of his eye. If you believe the folk believes, looking straight at them, you fall under the spell of mermaids. What happens next is not known, but only that they take the traveler with them into the water. And for some reason, he said that they like to tickle men to death. So when he was walking, he pulled his hair out of the temple on his head so that he could repel the obsession using the traditional folk ritual. So for the rest of his life, the narrator, the grandfather, walked with one naked temple. This took place in the early 1900s, even before the first Russian Revolution. And the location was in the Tver region in Kashino, an old beautiful resort town. And even now there are a lot of anomalous or paranormal areas nearby. And this is only in one area. And how many are there in Russia? Gennady Belimov was Russian ufologist and researcher of paranormal phenomenon, writer and journalist. He was also the head of the Volga group for the study of anomalous phenomena. Years ago we corresponded, and I recall that he produced the first ufology textbook for a Russian university years ago. The following information is from his research. The setting is the Volga-Akhtuba floodplain he loved very much, having spent years there. He wrote, "Each one of us loves and glorifies in his own way this wonderful land, which looks like a paradise oasis, and as if in return given by the Creator to people for the deserts of the surrounding steppes of the Caspian lowland scorched by the sun. It stretches for many hundreds of kilometers in the life-giving interfluve from the source of Akhtuba to the Caspian Sea, like a magical emerald valley full of life and joy. From the steep bank of the Akhtuba, a luscious green distance with a dark curl of floodplain forests. In the floodplain, we, the townspeople, spent our best hours and sometimes days of rest. There is something to do here: fishing, hunting, picking mushrooms and berries, just walking along reserved paths, taking photos, so that later you will please your friends with good photographs. There is hiking, cycling, kayaking, tourist routes, and orienteering lovers organize exciting running competitions with a compass and a map almost all year around. It's good in the floodplain. I would like to come here more often, Belimov said, to have a rest in body and soul, if not to leave the restless city with its eternal vanity. Strange incidents in our region, of course, could not do without the participation of the floodplain. Sometimes Belimov heard information about the UFO sightings over the valley. And then someone dreamed of drowned people in deep pools of old women gardens, and then they had frightened ghosts from the whirlwind of the night. Or even completely some unknown forces circled people in seemingly familiar places, as if making fun of the poor losers. Maybe they were joking, or maybe they were punished for some kind of misconduct, for a disrespectful attitude towards nature and its inhabitants. One story especially impressed, and not only Belimov. And here's what the Russian researcher described. The person to whom it was necessary to turn to learn the mysterious phenomena of the floodplain was the Volga writer Semyon Nikolaevich Kolotilov. He was an ardent fisherman who devoted several of his books to this human passion. Belimov asked him over the phone, "Were there any unusual cases with you in the floodplain?" And Kolotilov responded, "There were, when the guardian angel saved and when his own ingenuity helped out. But he didn't find any explanation for one case. He still doesn't know what it was. The incredible event took place in the spring of 1970, between May 10th to May the 12th. Semyon Nikolaevich, at that time a 30-year-old man, handsome and powerful, arrived by bicycle to Kurganiha, in the vicinity of Leninsk, where he lived then, to fish for pike perch. He was fishing and heard sounds in the overflowing water aside, like a herd of cows splashing. Looked around, there is no one, no cows, no shepherd, but the noise goes on. At some point he could not resist. He went to see what was splashing there, and he was amazed at what he saw. Imagine, Gennady, the whole flooded meadow was teeming with carp, huge. The narrator recalled the picture that he saw. Either the receding water cut them off, or they were frolicking in the warm waters, but only their backs flashed and the grass around was shaking. Well, Kalatilov got excited. He walked into the water up to his knees. He tried to catch the fish with his hands, but was not successful. Then Kalatilov shouted to his partner, Vaska, get on the bike and come to his house, bring 2 traps. Vaska ran back and forth, brought traps, but did not climb into the water himself. He was without boots, and for him the water was cold in the spring. In a word, Semyon Nikolaevich filled the trap with 7 carp of 5 or 6 kilograms each. So as not to fight with them, he cut their spines with a knife. They were alive, but they didn't pound like that, as the fish would. He took off his belt, adapted it to carry the fish, and then the ultimate happened. Semyon's skin froze. Belimov recorded everything in detail and played from the recorder. I turned to some noise and saw a water shaft is coming right at me, but unusual. It is like a barrel. The length is about a meter, more than half a meter thick, and rushes so that there is a wave in front of it. What? This is the first time I've seen this. The water shaft rushing at me, something dark inside. I can't make out anything. I think feverishly. It attacks, so it's not afraid. I managed to take a few steps and stood behind a tree in the water, hugged it, pressed myself, and this shaft, either a huge fish or something else, makes one circle in the water near the tree, then another circle. Everything gurgles, there is noise. I press myself against the tree. I'm afraid, naturally scared. And then this monster left where it came from. I alone saw it. Vaska was out of the sight, and this remained a secret for me for the rest of my life. I have not written about it anywhere in my stories and essays. Well, there was simply no explanation for what happened. Only it caused a strong fear. It is still scary to remember. Kalatilov added, yes, God knows, maybe a water goblin. At least he cannot suggest anything else. In villages, they all talk about water and forest chimeras as if they are. The rumor is not in vain about that. He somehow angered the waterman. So Semyon Nikolaevich needed to take 3 cycling trips to take all the carps caught home to Leninsk. A dozen years later, he received an apartment in Volsky from the Volga pipeline, and since then, a city dweller, he loves the city as much as his small homeland in the Urals. And later, Belimov told the case that Kalatilov told him to a relative, Georgy Gritsenko. He was an avid fisherman. How to explain that horror? Here's what Belimov's relatives said. Kalatilov should not have got in there. The carps arranged mating games in warm waters in a shallow place. Spawned, therefore, and he got into this business. And he also cut the spine of the fish, where the water goblin got angry. The fish were already harassed, but here he did not even let them spawn. It was not necessary. Georgy sadly shook his head. Has anything like this happened to anyone else? It would be nice to know. Although the case was unique in its own way, it may not be an isolated one. There are still a lot of fishermen and hunters along the Volga areas. Belimov's beloved floodplain is not far from the Caspian, but let me add a few words about the mermaids. Can fabulous mermaids be quite real creatures that have lived in the seas, rivers, and lakes since the time immemorial? It is difficult to imagine a positive answer to this question, but the facts show that humanoid beings can actually live in water. I read some recollections of Russian eyewitnesses who had observed the mermaids or similar humanoids. One report stated that in 1963, in the Kagul floodplains not far from the Soviet-Romanian border, a young border guard, Lieutenant Z, while hunting in the reeds, heard a human groan. It came from the side where an excavator was standing near the shore, engaged in reclamation work. Soon it was possible to find someone who made plaintive sounds. It was an eerie-looking humanoid male creature, completely naked with black and brown skin, long matted hair, and a beard. He had webbing between his fingers. The creature's right arm was wounded and covered in blood. The waterman was either gurgling or croaking, pointing with his good hand either at the wound or the excavator. It became clear that the poor fellow had been hooked with a bucket during reclamation work. Z went up to the creature, took out a first aid kit, processed and bandaged the wound. Soon he felt much better. The waterman broke a reed, made a breathing tube out of it, and disappeared into the water. The border guard only had time to notice that his legs were like flippers with large membranes. The story was published in the almanac It Cannot Be in the year of 1991. As the famous Soviet cryptozoologist Bykova correctly noted, there is a certain amount of implausibility in this story. An aquatic creature should not use a tube for breathing. Although in the 15th, 16th centuries, such water creatures with membranes on their arms and legs were encountered and described by travelers on Lake Van, now in Turkey. Mentions of mermaids have been found in the folklore of many peoples since very ancient times. In 1608, the mermaid was seen by sailors from the ship of Henry Hudson. They noted her back and chest were feminine. Her skin was very white. She had long black hair and a tail like a dolphin. In 1830, the inhabitants of Benbekuila Island in the Hebrides, collecting seaweed, observed a strange creature frolicking near the coast. Outwardly, it resembled a little girl with long black hair. White, delicate skin and huge breasts caused an unprecedented delight among males. Men tried to catch the little mermaid, and one of teenagers actually threw a stone at her. Although the mermaid disappeared under the water, the stone still overtook her, and the blow was fatal. A couple of days later, the corpse of the mermaid washed up on the shore of the island. Almost all the inhabitants of the island came to see this dead creature. If its upper half almost completely resembled a human one, then the lower one ended in a huge fish tail. There was no doubt that this was a real mermaid. Because of her strong resemblance to a person, the city authorities even gave an order to make a coffin for the deceased and sew a shroud. Soon the most unusual funeral in the world took place, the funeral of a mermaid. Unfortunately, attempts to find her grave have ended in failure. Alas, such evidence is not proof for scientists. They believe that eyewitnesses mistook seals, brown dolphins, manatees, or sea cows for mermaids. However, the above-mentioned sea animals are not found in freshwater lakes. So what was then mistaken for mermaids in such bodies of water? In 2007, people, or humanoid amphibians, have been increasingly seen in the Caspian. This is explained by the fact that intensive oil production, geophysical explosions, and the search for new deposits of black gold forced these mysterious inhabitants of the sea to leave their habitual habitats, where before they were quite successfully hiding from human beings. In March of 2007, the sailors of the fishing trawler Baku even managed to take photos of this mysterious creature. In an interview with reporters, the captain of the trawler, Gafar Hassanov, said the following: "Strange creature swam for a long time not far from us, following a parallel course. At first the crew thought it was a large fish, but then they noticed that hair was clearly visible on the monster's head, and the front fins were not fins at all, but hands. After the captain's interviews appeared in the newspaper, other eyewitnesses began to report their encounters with the amphibious men. Some of them even saw this creature on the shore and were able to look at it quite well. Here's a description of the Caspian Russell, this is how this creature was nicknamed, based on the eyewitness accounts given by journalist Mikhail Kostin. The height, 165 to 168 centimeters, densely built, with a convex, comb-like belly, pinniped feet, 4 fingers with membranes on hands. Moon-colored leather, coarse black-green hair on the head. Their arms and legs are slightly shorter and thicker than those of an ordinary person. Nails grow not on the toes but also on the tip of the hump nose, forming something like a dolphin's beak. No ears visible. The eyes are large and round. The mouth is large with a protruding upper jaw. The lower lip without a chin merge smoothly into the neck. It turns out something like a reduced likeness of a shark's mouth. I read another recollection regarding the Caspian Sea. In the city of Shevchenko, now Aktau, in Kazakhstan, on the Mangishlak peninsula of the Caspian Sea, the narrator met a man who fed some underwater inhabitants with condensed milk and other products in tubes and sealed packages. He swam quite far and left his gifts there, somewhere in a conditional place under the water. About once a week, depending on the weather, he took back empty containers and left a new set of products. The narrator believed that unintelligent beings would not be smart enough to open the airtight containers. This took place in 1973, and the person who did it worked for the Mangishlak power plant. The other Russian mentioned that there are hybrids and chimeras, remnants of the pre-deluge civilization. Yes, they had a lot of stories about mermaids in the Caspian Sea, but he personally had not seen them. But he has seen seals, and he says you can easily mistake them for a person at dusk. But the other person said that he himself has seen mermaids in the Caspian Sea. Please look at my videos about the Caspian underwater humanoids. I have done extensive research on the types of the cryptids there. The playlists are in the description to this video. I will bring you more stories about Asian underwater creatures, but of course not only that. It doesn't matter if you encounter them in southern Africa or in northern India, in lakes, in rivers, in seas. But I am especially interested, of course, in Russia, Ukraine, where I am from, in Central Asia, China, and other parts of the world too. Some of them I had visited during my field research, such as Yucatan, Mexico, or Southern Africa. If you can support my research, you will find the description on how to do it, links actually in the description to this video. Please tell about my channel, please tell to others, and please like it. Thank you.